Let's move on and talk about transformations. So I'm going to start by creating just a simple square. Go to the rectangle tool, go into the artboard, click and drag. Remember to constrain proportions. I'm going to hold down my shift key. Alright, so I have a white fill with a black stroke. So a transformation is the ability to change an object's size, shape, or position on the artboard. And there are a number of ways that we can do these. And it pretty much takes a little bit of experimentation and learning each of the different methods to achieve that comfort with transformations. So before we even start looking at the tools, I want to make note of the horizontal, vertical axes. So when we talk about our x coordinates, those are the horizontal and our y coordinates are the vertical. So our tools are in sort of this third section of the toolbox. And so we do have hidden tools underneath. Let's just go through and talk about not all of them, the top portions. The bottom get to be a little bit more advanced that we'll talk about at a later time. Alright, so like I said, there are tools that are hiding underneath of these tools. So let's start with the reflect tool. The reflect tool basically flips an image across an axis. So it'll flip it across either vertically or horizontally. The rotate tool, probably most are familiar with. This rotates the object or a group of objects around a fixed point. Next door, we've got three here. We're going to talk about the first two. So the scale tool, again, most people understand that has the ability to enlarge or reduce the size of objects. And the shear tool, as the little icon demonstrates, basically slants or skews on an axis. The shear tool of the tools that I just mentioned, the four tools, shear tool would be used the least. I'm going to tell you probably the scale tool and the rotate tool are going to be used most often. Below on the second line here that I have is the free transform tool. And this one has the ability to perform quick transformations and distortions in objects in perspective. So it's kind of the quick fix where we can actually do things like rotate and scale with just this one tool. Okay. We talked about our shape builder tool and live paint bucket light paint selection tool last lesson. I can show you some of these are sort of effects, so they do fall into transformations. However, we have a lesson at a later time that will discuss these. The width tool though is kind of fun because you can actually click and drag the width of an object in really fun distortions. You see how I can really make it awkwardy. I call it always kind of the cartoon effect because you can get thick and thin, blobby type features. So it still is a box and it still has a black stroke on it, but I've just changed the width of the stroke around that object. All right. So let's look at how we can utilize these tools. I'm going to delete this and start with a clean object. So I'll have a box and I'll make a circle. So I'm using the rounded rectangle tool. Actually, let's make a rounded rectangle and then let's make a ellipse using a circle with the ellipse tool. So I do want to point one more thing out too that we haven't really looked at or mentioned. When you're on, when you have a selection here, you may have noticed that you get these little circles in the corner and you wonder what in the world is that? That's a newer feature to Illustrator and it allows you to click and drag corners in. So it's as though you're doing the rounded rectangle. You really have no need to go to that rounded rectangle because you can just drag this and eventually it goes into a circle because all the edges are rounder, the corners are rounded. So that's what that little icon does. We'll talk again about that at a later point, but I know some people were wondering what in the world is that. All right, so back to transformations. one of the things that we need to be aware of is our point of origin. So the point of origin is basically where or how transformations are executed in relation to this one fixed point. So with this box, my center point here by default will be my point of origin. So a lot of times when I'm using this tool, it goes to this center point, which all of my objects have. If I select this one, you can see as well. Okay, so that's my point of origin. And now I can change that point of origin to another area or another point somewhere on the artboard. So let's go through there and talk about how can we actually do these transformations. There are what they say different methodologies for using them, and I'm going to tell you 4 different methodologies, but again, there's many more ways. You just kind of you know, as you explore, you'll find your comfort in one specific way, and that's probably the way you'll utilize a transformation tool in Illustrator. So with the transformation tools, I can select a tool. Let's just start with the rotate tool because that's a good visual and everybody understands what that does. So before I do that, I need to have my object selected because Illustrator has no idea what I am thinking. So I have to say, yep, I want to rotate this box. So let's get that box selected. Now let's go to the rotate tool. So the easiest, most simple way is to, with my object selected, select my transformation tool. When I select that tool, I go out into the artboard and I just click and drag. And by default, using this method, my point of origin will be defaulted as that center point. And you can see I get this little target there. I know it's kind of hard to find, but I can, you know, I can click and drag. It's not that I have to do it all at one time. I can keep clicking and dragging to get this to exactly where I want it to be. So that's the first way, just having my object selected, click and drag. The second way that I could do this, again, with my object selected, I'll just leave it where it's at. I'm going to now double click on the tool. So I'm going to my rotate tool, double click on it, and I get a little dialog box. It's the tools dialog box, and here I am now able to enter in values. I always suggest that you turn preview on so you have an idea of what is happening. You're not just blindly choosing an amount. So here I actually can click and drag my angle, or if I know I want this at a 45 degree, I'm going to press tab because if I press OK, it's going to, you know, if I press my enter key, it's going to be like an OK and it's going to apply it. So I don't want to do that yet. Now the reason why this isn't a true 45 degree, if you remember when I started this, my box wasn't straight. I already had rotated it. So that's why this 45 degree isn't what you're thinking, hey, that's not 45. It's because it's going off of 45 of where I started. Okay. Now, one of the options, this is grayed out because this isn't applying at the moment, but sometimes I might have a pattern fill. And some of these transformations also, there are options where you can check so that like a scale, you may want to scale your stroke as well. So keep an eye out for some of those options. There may be things there that you do want to select as you're applying the transformation. All right, so then I have actually 2 things I could do here. I could click OK and it would apply it and I'm done. Or I can click copy and that allows me to create a copy of what my transformation. So it leaves the original and this transformation that I applied is a copy. Kind of a nice tool. All right, let's go down to this rounded rectangle. Again, I'm going to select it. Okay, so the first way that we talked about applying this tool was just to click the tool, go out, click and drag. Second way was to double click the tool in the toolbox to bring up the tools dialog box, allowing me to enter values. The third way that I can do this is have click the tool and then go out and click in the artboard and watch what happens where I click. I'm going to click right here in the top left corner. So my point of origin now moved. I still see my center point because you always will have a center point for your objects, but now my point of origin is not defaulted in that center. Instead, it's where I just clicked. And now I can click and drag. Okay, and you can see how this is sort of, you know, it's pinned in that top corner, and so my rotation goes about that pin. That's where it's sort of stuck. It's like putting a pin through a piece of paper, and I'm able to, you know, swing that around. Okay, so that's the third way. And the last way is kind of a combination of method 2 and method 3. So I'm going to again have my object selected. I'm going to select my tool, and this time I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click. Do you see what just happened? I got a new point of origin where I held down my Alt key, and I also got my dialog box. So it's, like I said, kind of a mixture of those two that I showed you just recently. I can change my point of origin, and I can also get my dialog box. So if I know specific amounts, I can do that. And now this is acting a little bit funny because my point of origin is actually outside of my bounding box of my object. So that means it's rotating about this point. And if I, just as a preview, let you see what it's going to do, you know, it's staying that equal distance all the way around. Okay, so I can click either copy again, or I can click OK. Let's do copy, and you can see how I get two of them on my artboard. All right, since I did a transformation and I did a copy, there's a fast way that I can repeat this last transformation, and it's called transform again. I find it up in my object menu under transform. There it is, transform again. The quick key for this is Control D, and if you can remember, D for duplicate. Okay, Control D for duplicate. So if I want to repeat this, I'm going to click transform again, and you can see it made a copy with my rotation. If I do a Control D, you can see that I can go all the way around, and actually I'm going to, it's offset enough that I can end up with quite a stack of rounded rectangles here going around and around and around. Fun effects. I mean, it can be really fun, giving an illusion of depth there. So transform again allows me to repeat the last transformation very, very quickly. Okay, let's clean up our artboard a bit. I'm just clicking, dragging to select everything, then pressing my delete key, and I'm going to grab this as well. We didn't use that. Couple more things here I want to show you. If I have, say, a few boxes, so I'm going to have drag a square. I'm going to go to my selection tool, and the fast way to make a copy, the way that I typically use create a copy, is holding down my Alt key. Alt and drag will drag out a copy, and I'm holding Shift. That's why you're seeing that line, because it's lining it up, right? So then hold down, let up on everything to set it. Hold down my Alt key, I get my double arrow. Drag, but hold Shift, it's going to constrain it. So now I have basically 3 boxes that I know are lined up. They're not equally spaced, but they're lined up. So if I were to select all of them, because I said on many of these transformation tools, you can apply this transformation to one or a group. And so let's just apply a transformation to all 3 of these. So again, let's just go to the rectangle tool and say I know the exact amount that I want to transform this. So I'm going to double click. You can already see what's happening. If I choose 45 degrees, and I'm just going to press Tab to sort of see what happens, click OK. It took the whole group. I have one point of origin for all 3 of these objects. They're actually not physically grouped. I didn't go under the object menu and group them. Instead, I just selected them. Illustrator thought, oh, you want them all. And so it acted as though it was one object. Sometimes that's what we want. Sometimes that's not what we want. So I'm going to undo. Control Z, remember, is the undo. So instead of having them work as one, I want them to transform each. There's my option. So I'm going to go under Object, Transform, and here's the Transform Each. So this will allow me now to make a transformation independently. So the multiple objects are individual, and it will independently do this transformation. So I can do a scale, I can do a move, I can do a rotate, and here are some of those options that I was referring to a bit earlier. Specifically the scale, strokes, and effects. This is important if you're doing a scale, because sometimes if you don't have that checked, your stroke won't scale with your object, and all of a sudden you got a big fat chunky stroke on a little tiny object. So those are just good to pay attention to. I'm going to turn my preview on. I always like to see what's going on. And we'll just stick with our same rotation because that's what we've been looking at. Again, I'm going to press tab just to see what's going to happen without clicking enter for OK. There we go. It transformed each one of those independently. So if I click OK, we can see what happened here. They're still all selected. If I deselect, you can see how they were able to apply that transformation to each one individually. So that's a nice tool. We also have a free transform tool. And by the way, many of you maybe paid attention. I need to have an object selected here. Select my box. Under object and transform, notice that there were a lot of these tools that I found over here in the toolbox. So yet another way that you can actually go and apply. So say I wanted to rotate, here it is. It's the same thing that I got when I double clicked on my exact tool. So you can go up to the menu to apply a transformation as well, if that feels a bit more comfortable for you. Now the tool I wanted to look at is this free transform tool. And like I said, when you click the free transform tool, you get to see this bounding box, and it's an 8-handled bounding box. That means that these little tiny things here, you can see my cursor going crazy, those are the handles. I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit so we can just focus on just this one shape. Okay? So what I get also as I go to the free transform tool is I get this sort of sub menu that opens up. So this is my free transform tool options. So these are options to affect how my free transform tool will work. So this is a way that you can do quick, inexact transformations, and on its most simplest way, it's at the default settings right now. This actually is called free transform. So it's as though I'm in my default settings. I can click and drag. I can scale. You got to watch how your icons are working. You can do skews. See how it's skewing it here? Kind of just twisting it. So that's a way that I can use this tool just by clicking and dragging, and you're going to watch your little cursor and how that changes to know what's going on. Here's the rotate. If I'm here, here's a scale. You know, so whether you're on the anchor or right outside the anchor, you're going to have a different little icon. This will always use my object center point as the point of origin. Okay, and I do have some ways that I can hold modifier keys down. And sometimes these are a little bit tricky, give you a warning, if they're going to catch on or not. So if I click on this tool and I hold down then the control, and I have better luck if I click first and then hold down control. Do you see what's happening? This one is just distorting it. So this is distorting this point independently. So my free transform tool plus control, I get to grab a point independently and distort. Okay, now if I hold down, and actually before I do this, I'm going to go to just a regular box because I think this effect is easiest to see on just a regular box. Back to my free transform. So I was holding down control, and actually, like I said, I like to click the handle first and then hold control. You know, it seems a little finicky to personally how it attaches. The second is actually holding down all of your modifier keys. So it would be Shift, Control, and Alt, and there it goes. It's dragging it or distorting it in perspective. If you know, like 1 point, 2 point perspective, that's what it's doing. So it's pulling on one of the sides and making it basically feel as though it's going back to horizon line to be in perspective. Okay, so that's what I've got. Control, I've got Alt, and I've got Shift all held down. Okay. Now, what's up with these options? The constrain scales it in proportion, and you see it's either on or it's off. So if I'm using my transformation, if it's on, I don't have to worry about holding shift. It's going to always constrain that proportion. Now, if I go to this button here, this is actually the perspective. This is a perspective distort, and my tooltip should pop up here. There it is. So this is what I was just doing, holding down those modifier keys of Shift, Alt, Control. Instead, I can just click this button and away I go. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Oops, and I just started rotating it. The last one here allows me to freely distort, and again, the tooltip should pop up. So here I can freely distort, meaning I can grab any one of these corners and I could do whatever I want. Now, it's not the corners of my container, it's the corners of the bounding box. See how I'm getting it? It's the bounding box. So don't go grabbing these corners because that's not going to do anything. You're in a transformation. The only thing you can change are those outside bounding box, but you can really distort freely your shape. So this is the default, this is the perspective distort, and this is the free distort. So that's the distortion. We also have a transform panel, which I can have with my tools. I see it right here. I also can bring it up under window. Here it is, transform. So here's my transform, and this will again allow me to do size, some scaling, some rotating, some skewing, changing my X, Y location. So X and Y is my location. W and H is width and height. So that would be a scale. If I wanted to constrain it, I would click my link so they work together. That would keep it in constraining it. Okay? So those are the transformation tools. Play with them, get to know them. You don't have to know all methods of applying. Just get used to one methodology that I had mentioned and practice.